Hello, Group C. Well, I was dumb, and I know there were a couple people who were trying to view and now are apparently not online because I couldn't get onto my own Hangout. But here I am! I made it work. So, this is still a really important tip session. So if you can watch it on YouTube later, or if you can come join now, that's actually immensely important to being able to complete this paper, as you should. So what I'm going to do is I have a PowerPoint I've made for you guys, and I'm just going to pull it up here. I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can take a look at it. And we can go over a little bit about the things that are important to know and important to sort of include in this project number one. I know that project number one can be really, really difficult, just in terms of it's a creative assignment. It might not be what you're used to in terms of stuff you've had to do with writing essays before, which is why there are a few tips and tricks here for you guys to be as successful as possible in this assignment. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. It's going to start repeating itself forever. So now it's repeating itself forever, but that's okay. We are here on the English 101 Project 1. I'm going to start the slideshow from the beginning. And hopefully you guys can see this. I had one point where this did not work, and it was really obnoxious. But if you can't see it, and it's not working, go ahead and exit the tip session. I have a better one I'll send you. So, okay, this is English 101, project number 1. What you guys are doing is writing a profile of an interesting character in your life, preferably somebody you don't know super well. So I have a few example profiles here. I'm going to send you these. I'll send you these links so you can read through them yourself. But it's Frank Sinatra Has a Cold by Gay Talese, Roger Ebert, The Essential Man, and then one that I wrote called Starting from Scratch, which I wrote for Arizona Highways Magazine. And these are all examples of ways that profiles have been done creatively and been done well. So the first thing I want to kind of start with is introducing your profile piece. And this is something that I wanted to get at because it's something that's really important to Greg when he comes and grades your pieces. It should be clear what you're doing. That's kind of the main thing. So the way that I look at any introduction of any paper is that you are literally introducing the paper. And I know that seems obvious, but you need to include the details or the language that allows people to understand everything they need to understand before you move into the body of the paper. So in this case, you want to give people a kind of a good idea of who your subject is, and you want to include language that's going to let readers know that you're telling your subject's story. So in this case, you want to have a sense of purpose. So your purpose being to tell this person's story, probably to get at your thesis or main idea, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you want to be able to integrate that creatively. This is a narrative, or you're doing storytelling here. So creative integration is really important. Saying something like, in this paper I will, or in this essay I will, or like, even like, this is a story about blah, blah, blah. Like, that doesn't creatively integrate it and really doesn't do justice to the storytelling. So the question you sort of want to ask yourself is, how can you indicate that you're telling someone's story without saying so outright? So I'm using a couple sentences from the beginning of the profile I wrote of this bicycle builder in Flagstaff, Arizona, that you can really get the idea that I'm telling his story without me saying, and what story about him I'm telling, without me saying, in this article, or this is the story of, or whatever. I do use the word story. That isn't necessarily something every profile is going to have. That's just how I wrote it. But so here in my piece, I wrote, so begins the story of Steve Garrow, Flagstaff's resident bike guy. Garrow's stories include the one about having to rebuild himself, too, after a biking accident that left his legs almost entirely paralyzed. So that sentence sort of clues you in on what the overall interest of this piece is, and the fact that it's going to be telling sort of that story over the course of the profile piece. Speaking of which, so what? So this is a really important part that's going to come also in your introduction when you are talking about your thesis. So you think the person you're profiling is interesting, but so what? Like, why should anybody else care? They're not the ones interacting with this person. They don't know them personally. So what inspires others to read about your subject? Big surprise. This is your thesis statement. That's what drives the story, the so what factor. So, for example, in the Baca profile piece that you guys read, that you were asked to sort of identify what the main takeaway was. And a lot of people said it was this idea of poetry as lifesaver, or his ability to sort of change and turn his life around through poetry. And that's something that people might care about, even if they don't know who he is or know him as a person, is the fact that this art form or this use of language gave him the power to turn his life around. Similarly, in the Roger Ebert profile, it talks about, it has been nearly 4 years since Roger Ebert lost his lower jaw and his ability to speak. Now television's most famous movie critic is rarely seen and never heard, but his words have never stopped. So the idea there is, you know, like, what happens to somebody who's such a big voice when they lose their ability to speak? And then, of course, people do care about Roger Ebert, so there's that level of human interest. Frank Sinatra, the interesting sort of core piece of that profile piece is that Frank Sinatra had a cold. That's why it's called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. But it talks about the common cold robbed Sinatra of that uninsurable jewel, his voice. And then in the piece that I just read you part of, what does it mean to build bicycles but be paralyzed from the waist down? So all of these are questions that will that inspire people to want to know more. And that's what gets them into reading your profile piece. So we're telling stories about things we didn't know before, about perseverance, determination, humanity, and stories that humanize people. And that's what makes people care, is that sort of seed of, like, how does this story humanize this person, or what does it say about humanity as a whole? And that's kind of the so what you want to get at. Your so what is your story, and that's something that's really important to focus on. Before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about your interview. Most of you should have already done this. If you haven't done this, I'm going to shake my finger at you. But one thing to really think about in terms of your interview is just getting all the details you can. When you go into the interview, you might know sort of what you want to focus on, but you don't know exactly how you're going to come at it. And that's good. You're going to get all the details you can and then figure out how you want to come at it. If your interview was only like 10 or 15 minutes, you know, you didn't have a very good or very deep conversation with the person, I'd suggest going back. I know that a lot of you probably have written a fair amount of your rough drafts, but it's never too late to go back, have another quick even if it's a quick conversation, at least it's 2 quick conversations instead of 1. But the more depth you can get into, the better the story you're going to tell is. And it'll be really obvious if you did a really short interview, because you'll be scrambling for information to fill the holes. That's why it's so central to the storytelling that you get all the information that you need from the person you're talking to. But then once you have all that information, you really need to narrow it down. So you're not writing this person's resume. I will know, okay? I will know if you turn in your paper to me and you haven't watched this tip session or you haven't listened to me, because I get things like this where people will write out somebody's job history or their life history or their job description. That's not telling someone's story. Someone's resume is not their story. That's stuff they've done, but that's not who they are. You want to get at who they are. The most compelling part of somebody's life might be their experience in the Air Force, or their determination in their job, or their choice to leave home. And it's up to you as a writer to energize that story and make it readable and enjoyable. Sure, you can say, oh, I'm really interested in this person's story because they do really hard work in their job. But if I say that to you, you're not inherently going to be like, oh yeah, that sounds fascinating. Like, your job as the writer is to take the details and put them together in a way that interests other people. So when you're working on your piece, think to yourself, would this interest me if I was just reading it online, or would I close out of it? Would I be like, this is boring and what's the point? Even with a narrow focus, it can be boring, which is why it's so important to select the right details. So you really don't have to repeat everything your subject told you. This is an easy error to make when you've done an interview, because it's like, oh, they said so many things and I want to include all of them. But you don't have to, and you shouldn't, unless you did a very, very short interview and you're scrambling to fill the holes, which you shouldn't have done. But that happens. Your job as the writer is to organize specific details into something that's not just readable but enjoyable. So, even if somebody went on a tangent and told a whole story about how, when they were young, they watched a squirrel climb up a tree, and that was like a really tangible, like important experience for them. Unless that's relevant to the story that you're telling, or unless it's key to the story that you're telling, don't include it. Not every detail needs to be told. The best writing comes out of choosing the right details. So there's an example of telling details here that I want to talk about. And telling details are little things. They're usually descriptive, that give you a good idea of who the person is or how they behave based off of certain things. So here's an example from the Ebert profile. Unlike the others, Ebert, 67, hasn't brought much survival gear with him. A small bottle of Evian moisturizing spray with a pink cap, some Kleenex, his spiral notebook, and a blue fine tip pen. He's wearing jeans that are falling off him at the waist, a pair of New Balance sneakers, and a blue cardigan zipped up over the bandages around his neck. So all of these sort of give you a really, really clear picture of what Roger Ebert looks like, and more than that, who he is. The fact that he carries Kleenex with him, right? That gives you an idea of something beyond just what he looks like. The fact that he hasn't brought that much stuff with him to review this movie is an indicator of who he is and how he acts. This is a sentence from the profile I wrote. He maneuvers expertly between workbenches and welding station while punk rock band Screaming Females blasts on the stereo. So I actually went to this guy's house and he was playing music, and I was like, hey, like, what is this? So that I could include that detail. Because it gives you a really good idea of who this person is, that he's listening to this punk rock band. And so those kinds of telling details are really key. Appearance is something that I believe is crucial in a profile piece. If you're going to describe somebody, you want people to be able to envision them in their mind's eye, which is why telling details like this are so central. So you don't have to spend an entire paragraph describing what people look like, because you'll probably get into minutia and details that are boring. Just select a few really specific, clear details that help show readers who that person is and help them build a picture in their mind, and you're going to already have a much clearer picture and a more compelling story. There are also contextual details. So telling details like that are important, but you have to include other information too. Human connection rests in telling details because you can get a picture of them and sort of see and feel and get an idea of who they are. But there's a plot to the story, and that sort of rests in the life details you choose to include. And the fullness of your story relies on context. So this is where you're going to be integrating secondary sources. Those are important, but you're not writing a story about the background information. You're writing about your subject. So if your subject loves ballet, okay, and you're writing about their love for ballet, do not spend the entire paper telling us about the technicalities of ballet. You'd be surprised how many times I see this in these papers. And it's because you might not know where to start. You might not know how much secondary source information to include. Use it to illuminate who your subject is, but stay focused on your subject. So in the Frank Sinatra profile, we learn a little bit about Frank Sinatra's father, but that helps us learn about Frank Sinatra. Well, in this case, it says, most of the Italians and Sicilians who migrated to America just prior to the 1900s were poor and uneducated, were excluded from the building trades unions dominated by the Irish, and were somewhat intimidated by the Irish police, Irish priests, Irish politicians. So that clearly did not come from interview material with Frank Sinatra. That came from outside research about Italians migrating to America. But that teaches us a little bit about Martin Sinatra's father, which teaches us about who Frank Sinatra is. Now, this is a really long piece, so they could get into a lot of detail about like Frank Sinatra's parents. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that with the length of paper that you're writing, but this does give you a good idea of how you can integrate that sort of secondary source information or that contextual information without it taking over your story, and with it still just illuminating a piece of the picture of who your profile subject is. I want to talk really quick about scenes. I'm not going to spend very long on it, but what they are is basically story time equals real time, right? So you're watching events unfold in the story. If you are able to write a scene into your profile piece, it'll be really strong for the most part, unless it's a boring scene. Again, it's all about the way that you select details. So, you know, it's not necessarily that you want to be like, I walked up to my profile subject and she was sitting at the Starbucks table drinking her coffee and she drank it very slowly and we talked. Like, that's not an interesting scene. But if you get a little snippet of something interesting that they've done, or you know, you are with them while they're at work, or you're with them and you witness them doing something interesting, you can include that detail for detail, sort of play by play, and that helps show people who this person is. And that's something that really evokes them in the storytelling. But sometimes a profile won't have a scene. So, for example, there are tiny scenes within my Steve Garrow piece, the bicycle builder piece, where, you know, he maneuvers between the workbench, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a little scene, even though it's just sort of one thing that he does. But for the most part, there's not a lot of scenes in there, and that's okay too. It's still telling the story. Your conclusion should pull everything together. You want to end with something strong. So readers should feel like they're walking away with an impact. Conclusions are really hard, so I understand if you feel like you don't know how to write this or just stressed out about how to conclude your piece. You know that you can always contact me if you have questions or concerns, and we can even set up a time to chat if you want to just bounce ideas off of me. But your conclusion should sort of end with a punch, because you're telling someone's story and you don't want it to fizzle out at the end. Now, I'm not going to spoil those example profiles for you, so read them for ideas on how to conclude a piece like this. The last thing I want to talk about is the mini assignment or the multimodal portion. That goes back to your so what. So when you build the like mini trailer that you have to build for this, don't just summarize your profile and don't tease it without giving any information. Those are two ends of a spectrum that you don't want to deal with. You want to be somewhere in the middle. You want to give just enough information to get viewers interested, but not so much that they're like, well, I don't need to read that. I just learned everything. What would make someone want to read this? What would make you want to read this? It all comes back to your thesis. Why is the story important? Why should we care? What is the so what of your profile? Get that into your mini assignment, and you're going to have a much better chance of engaging readers. Get that in there without endlessly detailing what your story is. Don't retell your story. Engage people. Make them interested. Tease them just enough, but give enough information to give them an idea of what it is you're talking about. Because if you just say, coming soon, this profile piece, like, nobody's going to know what that is, and they're not going to want to. So give enough information to let readers know what it's about, but don't give too much. So that's all for this tip session. I hope that it clarified some things or was helpful to you, but if you guys have any questions, concerns, need to brainstorm, desire to bounce ideas off of someone, anything like that, you can reach out to me. This is my email address. You guys get emails from my ASU email, but this is the one that I use. So it's mollybilker@msn.com. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions, thoughts, concerns, or want to brainstorm. And I keep emphasizing this want to brainstorm thing because I think a lot of people don't realize that, like, brainstorming is a great way to come up with, like, to be able to write. Brainstorming is so much more of the writing process than people give it credit for. And because of that, I want you guys to know that you can reach out to me before you start writing. You can reach out to me if you want to come up with ideas of how to approach your writing. Or if you're in the middle of writing and you're like, I don't know where to go or what to do, I'm here. That's what I'm here for. So that's what I have for you guys. I hope that that presented well. And I'm going to stop screen sharing. Here, look, I'm back. I hope that everybody got a little bit of something out of this. Again, don't hesitate to email me if you have questions, thoughts, or concerns. And we can always set up a time to talk a little bit longer if you want to have a brainstorm session or something like that. That's what I'm here for. Good luck with your rough drafts. I know that they're due soon. And I will be responding to the first 12 that get posted to my discussion board. So do that. Post them there. But don't post them if they don't integrate these things, because I'll know and it will frustrate me. And also, like, you guys should do these before you submit them to anyone, because otherwise you're submitting for peer review something that you know needs help. So don't do that. Okay, that's all I have for you guys. Good luck working on these drafts, and I know that you all will be brilliant. So way to go. Thanks for watching my tip session. Bye.